Okay, welcome to another installment of Canadian Corner. This is Liddell with the on the casting job here, and we have Veldroff once again join with me on the play-by-play. Right now we have a match between Caffeinated Knights and Tricky Gooses. Currently, Caffeinated Knights is at the top of the standings, and Tricky Goose is struggling a little bit near a playoff bubble spot right now. Going into this map, Goose has banned Braxis Holdout and Towers of Doom. Meanwhile, Caffeinated Knights has banned out Dragonshire and Cursed Hollow. And Gooses, given first map pick, while Caffeinated first draft pick, have selected to go to Infernal Shrines. So as I started up here, I'm going to quickly go over to the gameplay screen so that we can see the respective teams have drafted.
And this is a replay cast, so we won't be able to watch them in the actual draft screen, but we do have their replay files pulled up and can see the draft order they picked in. They both banned the meta tanks of ETC and Diablo. Later on in the draft, some assassins were banned out with Greymane and Orphea, and finally, Caffeinated Knights banned Butcher against Tricky Gooses, probably having seen a couple games of just absolutely stomping with the Butcher comp that Tricky Gooses did in a previous matchup, and then Tricky banned Garrosh against Caffeinated Knights, probably in an attempt to tank choke them for their last little bit.
Alright, I'm going to start off with the announcements of the Tricky Gooses and who's playing what character. We have Duck on the Joanna, we have Wise on the Leoric, we have Birdie on the Sylvanas, we have Carpe Diem, it's moving around quick, Anduin, obviously, and we have Nanani on the Zeratul. That is the side of the Tricky Gooses.
And on the side of Caffeinated Knights, the blue team, we have Ark on Sonya, Harbarim on Stukov, Sadik on Jaina, Ghost Dragon on Cassia, and Osmanthus on Anubarak, the old Beetle King.
So, do you have any initial reactions to each team's draft, and who do you think has built themselves better for this map?
Well, looking at the order, which is actually kind of interesting, both teams picked up healers first. Caffeinated Knights picking up Stukov first, and then Tricky Gooses opting for an early Anduin. Tricky chose to go for the Zeratul again, which they've done before with some success in this map. It's a late game pick. I'm not certain it's going to have a lot of value, especially against a team that's not super squishy. I don't think he has a clear dive target. Stukov has a pretty good disengage. Anubarak has spell armor, Cassia has base armor, and Jaina, being really the only blow-up target, has a stasis that she can jump in later in game when Zeratul turns on. So I'd give the damage battle to the side of Caffeinated Knights. And then if we were looking at, I guess, stronger frontline, then maybe Caffeinated Knights has a burnable Anubarak. That tends to be his weakness. But if as long as he's good about holding his disengages, I don't know that'll be a big issue here.
Right. Also, Sonya gets great sustain on the objective on this map, and I wouldn't say the Gooses have a ton of stuns to interrupt the spin to win on Sonya.
Yeah, really not much at all. They have a potential light bomb, which is inconsistent at best against a Sonya, and then a wailing arrow. So if most of your interrupts are ultimates, then that's not the place you want to be against a Sonya, especially with Condemn being really the only consistent, reliable interrupt. We see a little bit of an engage over bottom camp. Caffeinated Knights deciding to back off just a little bit. Maybe just allowing Tricky to take the camp, and Anubarak dives in and pushes off the Nani, who's got too low too quickly. They decide, you know what, this is better at camp, but we leave alone, and it's picked up on the side of Caffeinated Knights.
Yeah, we're seeing a kind of lack of damage showing itself there, as they kind of got bullied off that point pretty quickly, considering Sylvanas has okay damage, but I would argue, you know her better than I do, but it takes a little bit for her talents to turn her damage on, and so early game I don't think she is. We'll come back at the same spot, so that's good to know.
Great. Yeah, it notified me that I became the host. I didn't know that kept you synced, so that's good. Tricky Goose is deciding to clear the camp right away up top, while Caffeinated Knight gets an advantage on this this tribute. Now, Tricky Goose probably knows that with Zeratul, they're not going to win a bunch of early team fights, so they decided to go ahead and push in top instead of contesting this early tribute, which they're not getting as quickly as they maybe could have, and instead deciding to devote some resources to defending this top lane.
We see this a lot when teams realize they're not going to win the first objective on Infernal Shrines. They try and go get a split push, especially with Sylvanas, who can disable towers. But we're not seeing a ton of value top here. We see top towers and wall fall. So meanwhile, the Punisher is pushing bottom, but they don't quite have a lot of numbers here to push with it. So I don't know how much value it's going to get bottom lane.
Yeah, unless Caffeinated Knights picks up a kill, which it looks like they might on Carpe, and they do. Wow, John Cena just deciding, hey, I'm going to stomp this a little bit. I think the slow from Stukov is actually what secured that with the Punisher. Anduin wasn't able to walk away. Without that kill, it was looking to be a balance to what Tricky Gooses was able to capture top lane with just the wall, but along with the kill, they were able to get the well and take half the damage on that fort, really giving them a decided lead, if not a full structure advantage. For the side of Caffeinated Knights.
Be interesting to see what ult Nanani goes. I assume it's going to be Void Prison, but there's not a lot of wombo combo follow-ups on the side of Gooses to kind of get value on the Void Prison, unless it's just used purely to isolate half the team and pick off the other half.
Yeah, I think that's what they have to do. They have to go for the isolation. They can secure a Wailing Arrow off of the Void Prism, if they're, and potentially an Entomb as well, but they're not. You're absolutely right. They don't have this kind of massive wombo engage potential with the Johanna being the tank. She could go Falling Sword if kind of a Mimi. We see a little bit of an engage from Caffeinated Knights as they decided to just push off Tricky Gooses and take that siege camp right there. And then Tricky Gooses says, hey, we're not 10 yet. We're going to let you have this one. They're positioning to defend bottom, but it looks like they're going to have to just let this one go because there's an even number of people from Caffeinated Knights, and once again up that talent tier advantage. Duck decides to get a little bit of damage in, but he's Johanna, so he's just going to back off immediately as soon as he does that, saving his shield exit. Now that doesn't. Okay, Anduin's pull is out, and Nani deciding to get a lot of damage on that Stukov. They have 10s now, so they're going to invade. Let's see if they use the Wailing Arrow off this. They don't. Light Bomb's used off of it, but Unstoppable goes out by Osmanthus. Really skilled usage there. Very nice.
Yeah, I was just thinking the last time we saw Gooses on this map, which is the last game we casted of them, they lost the early game quite heavily, but they also had a lot of value to gain with level 10s turning on, but I would say that there's not a clear advantage between either team in level 10s.
Change unless you're going for a blow up comp. It just gives you a lot of extra damage and sustain in fights. Flailing Swipe with Stukov, that makes a lot of sense as well, and is probably his primary disengage against a wombo combo set up by the Zeratul Void Prism. Summon Water Elemental, which is probably a way to once again lock down the Zeratul or whoever's a little bit out of position on the side of Tricky Gooses, and Valkyrie on the Cassia, and then finally Locust Swarm on the side of Caffeinated Knights for the Anubarak, which is not something you see every day, but it's going to give him a lot more sustainability in these fights.
That was a impressive medallion from Birdie there, as he almost got caught by the Valkyrie on Cassia, but that will be down for the next 5 minutes.
Now this is a fight both teams want to tank. Sonya's showing up. This is an even 5v5 now. Zeratul's setting up and trying to look for that Void Prism. That team's being real aggressive. Here comes the Void Prism most likely. There goes the Light Bomb. Everyone but most of the members of the blue team were captured in that. Oh, it looks like Tricky Gooses just have to back up. None of the team's members of Caffeinated Knights seem very low. They're just able to heal any damage that red team is able to put out. Most likely that's just because, once again, Sylvanas doesn't turn on until later in game in terms of mass AoE damage, and Zeratul is really not a character until 16, especially with the cleave build that it looks like Nani's going.
Yeah, we really see just the inability of Gooses to kind of disengage from the Anubarak stun and follow up with the Jaina slows, and so that's looking really oppressive on the back line of Gooses so far in this game.
I think I would have really liked to see a large-scale mage in the side of Tricky Gooses instead of the Zeratul. Just think that this is a little awkward. Zera's putting a lot of damage on the Jaina, but she's just going to walk back out. Kills are going to eventually happen from the Stukov, but they just have to back off to clear the Protector instead. Or the Punisher, rather.
You have to wonder how much Butcher was in their plans and how much that got interrupted when it got banned out.
I think it definitely could have been in their plans, but they had to know it was going to be expected because they played this map with Butcher.
Right.
Just the last game they played, so I don't expect that they thought that they would get it fully. They're being really aggressive on this Sonya. Sonya's stepping out just a little bit. Good root from the Anduin. She's just going to spin and walk right out. Light Bomb's being used. Actually stuns the Sonya. Leo's here as well. Does he use Entomb? He does use Entomb. Nani finishes, this wraps up the kill. Sonya's dead. Sylvanas locking down this fort. They decide, hey, we want to actually even the structure advantage up. We're 1 man ahead. So they're going to stay in. They don't stay in. They're positioning back despite the black arrows used on the fort. And it looks like they're just going to back off. And there goes the Sylvanas with a good silence, followed by Valkyrie. Anduin puts out some good healing, but it's not enough. Cassia is able to lock it down, even with 3 members locked in a Void Prism, and Tricky Gooses has to back right up. I think that was a little bit of a mistake. I would have liked to see them be a little bit more aggressive and unified under that fort with Black Arrows locking it down, and then just evening that structure advantage up.
Now it looks like that structure advantage is going to get even more lopsided as they are able to take top fort for free. Going into this bottom objective.
I know we talk about this a lot on our team, but Carpe hearthing right in the vision of this that bruiser camp, or that siege camp, allowed Caffeinated Knights to not only know that one of the team members on Tricky Gooses was dead, but also that they had probably a good 25 seconds of no Anduin as he goes back to the core, he heals up, and then he engages back with the team. We see a little bit of an engage coming out, down 16. Is this just Wise out of position, or are they actually still engaging? Duck's a little bit caught out in the back line. I'm assuming Shield's gone out. Shield goes out now. Too easy to lock down. Excellent 5-man silence, but too little too late. Being that far out of position as a team is a little rough, down 16, so I think this is just going to give Caffeinated Knights full advantage of the rest of this game, at least for another 25 seconds, as they decide, hey, we're going to take this advantage and take down a whole mid wall. And knowing that this camp is up as well, they're just going to go ahead and take that before backing out as Johanna gets back up.
Yeah, I'm currently Caffeinated Knights is tied for first in the division at this point, assuming we're talking as if this is happening on Thursday. And I think from the games I've seen so far from them is they don't seem to stick out in any particular way. They just play very clean games where all 5 people are usually on the same page, and they're very kind of assertive when they're getting their picks. And they get good value, but they also don't overextend much. So I think that's the compliment I'm going to give to them at this point in the season.
Tricky Gooses, knowing this is the only time they're probably going to be on the same talent tier with their power spikes at the same level. Wise is way out of position there on the left, or just isolated as the rest of the team decides they got to back up, but he just can't. So he dies pretty soon, and they were like, well, that was our chance. We got to back off now. We can engage the support with 5. With this this Punisher going to the side of Caffeinated Knights and them starting that siege camp and it all pushing bottom lane, this is almost definitely going to be a keep, especially with this being a frozen Punisher that's going to lock down those towers. So I think the best thing Tricky Gooses can hope for here is to not lose any people and then defend this before a win on the side of Caffeinated Knights.
Yeah, I think you give the keep and you hope Caffeinated Knights gets a bit too excited and tries to go core, and then you wipe them at core. That's the most obvious window I can see for Gooses to get back into this game. But if Caffeinated plays it smart, they have a they're gonna have a 4-structure lead after this. I think they can kind of cruise their way to victory.
Yeah.
Once they get this keep.
Wise being so forward positioned there, he's going to try to reduce their damage, which is a smart play. He just needs to keep mind of his health because he's going to die a little bit. Yeah, that's the danger of it. You can reduce their health as Leo, but having that death might give the tip the balance over to Caffeinated Knights in carrying this to a full victory. The fort's going to go down. The Punisher's only at a third health, and Tricky Gooses is trying to figure out how they burn it the rest of this way. The jump goes out on the Zeratul, followed by the silence, but he just barely gets away. Birdie is zoned and has to go full back. This Punisher has not much health left, but the core is going down. Shield's been broken. Sonya is just pummeling the core. Void Prism goes out, but misses the core. I have to think that was a mistake on the part of Nani, and this is going to be game 1 for Caffeinated Knights over Tricky Gooses.
Quite an assertive victory there, and honestly, I think they really felt the lack of damage, because Anub'arak is a very burnable tank, but when you don't have the damage to burn him, his CC is pretty oppressive, as he kind of can dive on the backline very quickly.
Yeah, I never saw Tricky Gooses be able to burn him because the Anub'arak wasn't far from the rest of his team at a given point. I think that there's a benefit to having a Anub'arak with someone like a Cassia. Cassia is what I like to call like a ranged assassin in melee range with nigh on a bruiser's health pool if you don't have CC lockdown. So the fact that the Cassia is able to be right next to the Anub'arak at all times makes the other team want to focus on burning the Cassia rather than the Anub'arak. And the fact that Anub'arak went heals made it even harder. There could have been a world where if Anub'arak was being isolated, the Sylvanas went percent damage at 1 instead. The technical damage over a course of a long engagement is lower on that talent, but the fact that it adds a slow, which there wasn't a ton of slows, consistent slows on the side of Tricky Gooses, and the fact that it does percent damage with auto attacks, I think would have given more damage over the length of the actual engagements that were happening rather than over the technical mathematical extension of time that could have been. So I think there's a couple differences. I definitely think the draft was a little weak, but I think that Caffeinated Knights played really cleanly and executed what they wanted to do very well.
Yeah, I think Sonya is a huge pickup on Infernal Shrines. And they didn't pick a lot of CC to stop that, and so I think that was a really oppressive factor. And just able to get your soul lane at that early and have confidence that it's going to win opens up other possibilities with your draft as well.
Yeah, and Caffeinated Knights picked Sonya up like second pick, so there was plenty of time to pick up more CC that for whatever reason Tricky Gooses just didn't feel they needed it against her or against the eventual Cassia, which happened later game.
Alright, I have the next game up and ready. Gooses elected to go with map pick again, and they chose Alterac Pass, which is one of their more favored maps, I believe. And as we switch over to the game screen here, we have a bit of a meme draft on our hands. Kind of Gooses special. Last match against Beef Boys, we saw that Butcher special, and this map we're gonna see the Abba and Sam special. As I press play on the game here, open some talents. I'll quickly announce the side of Gooses. We have Nanani on the Samaru. We have Carpe Diem on the Abathur. We have Duck on the Blaze. We have Falstead on the Wise. Oh, Wise on the Falstead, I should say. And we have Birdie on the Lucio. So a bit of role switching too when they go with this comp, as we see Carpe going off of the healer onto the Abathur, and we see Birdie taking on the healer role. I'm going to let you take away the side of Caffeinated Knights.
Great. On the side of the blue team, we have the Caffeinated Knights with Arc once again playing the Sonya, Harvram once again playing the Stukov, Osmanthus playing May this time, Ghost Dragon on the Lunara, and Static once again on the Jaina. I think for this draft, we'll see some interesting engagements between Tricky Gooses and this draft on the side of Caffeinated Knights.
Now, I don't quite have the bands up on me this time. So while I cam here, do you mind bringing those up on the match replay?
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, we see Diablo and ETC, the two primary meta tanks, being banned out. On either side, we see then Greymane and Orphea. First 4 bans, exactly the same, both games on both sides. Caffeinated Knights banning Diablo and Greymane against Tricky Gooses, and ETC and Orphea being banned against Caffeinated Knights. For the third ban, we see a Rhaegar being banned and a Cassia being banned against Caffeinated Knights. Probably because Caffeinated Knight's value with Cassia last game and her ability to step up next to the tank as often as she did. We saw May and Stukov once again getting picked really early. We saw a first pick Samuro and Falstad on the side of Tricky Gooses. Very interesting pickups.
Yeah, the reason I mentioned that is because I'm seeing the Blaze on the side of the Gooses, and maybe Duck has some defending to do that he can't do right now while we're casting, but I just find Duck as a solo tank, it's kind of exposed and can get kind of caught and out and isolated quite easily compared to other tanks. So we'll see how that plays out. You mean
Blaze, right? Yeah.
Blaze, yeah. My bad.
I doubt Duck as a tank is very great, but Blaze as a character can get caught out very often. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, my words got a bit muddled there. I wasn't talking about Duck the player. I was talking about Duck.
I'll talk about Duck the player, but I want him to know I'm talking about him.
Yeah. I'll make it more explicit next time I insult you, Duck. We see an early camp picked up immediately for Caffeinated Knights, which beats Goose's camp to their wall, and it takes down wall and top tower, so that's quite a lot of value for the first camp there.
This is an excellent example of why you want to pick up this first camp immediately on this map and push with it as hard as you can, especially if you know that the camp clear on the opposite team is weaker, because both teams tried to cap the siege, like the Giants, at this pretty much the exact same time. Caffeinated Knights got it done a lot quicker. They were able to take a whole wall while while Tricky Gooses got basically nothing for their camp. So being on time for that, locking in as quickly as possible, and then being able to take it again, which is what you see from Caffeinated Knights right now before the objective starts. Tons of value from those camps, especially when they recognize that with an Abathur, Tricky Gooses are going to be weak early game, and they have to capitalize on that value. And Abathur cannot clear waves camps very well, so they're going to have to devote extra resources, which is going to give Caffeinated Knights an advantage on the next objective phases.
We saw May getting isolated mid there and absolutely burnt by the Abba Sam combo, which is, you normally don't think of Sam as an early game character with a lot of damage, but with the Abba attack speed increasing his overall damage output, it can be quite surprising early on.
Now with Falstad going back and bribing his side of the camp and then still working on that last one, and with an Abathur and with a camp pushing mid, Tricky Gooses is going to have to back up this. Now Abathur is being seen here with vision on this camp, but they have to devote resources to clearing on the side of Tricky Gooses, which is going to allow Caffeinated Knights to step up forward. They're going to channel this, and then there's little hope of Tricky Gooses actually taking this back down a character before level 10 on this objective. With Nani popping out, but immediately swapping and getting vision on immediately. He's going to get healed by the Lucio. Actually going to take a kill on the Stukov and then fly out, but Wise with not enough help as he desperately tries to escape and isn't able to.
It was a valiant effort and actually a well worth it trade because it forced Caffeinated Knights off of the objective. And we kind of have a neutral team fight now between the two camps.
Anything that pushes this game longer is a benefit to Tricky Gooses, especially since their camp is pushing mid and now finally getting some value for them. However, in even fights or with even people up, it's not an even fight with an Abathur pre-10. So Tricky Gooses once again going to have to back off as they get chased by Caffeinated Knights. Caffeinated not able to close the distance and close the kills, but they are going to just go ahead and clear mid, take the advantage again. Know that pre-10 they can push in pretty aggressively here, so they're going to go back and try to take the rest of this objective.
Yeah, I think Gooses would like to have this go as long as possible, just because you do have the passive soak from Abathur, which has gotten them a half-level lead during this whole time process, and hopefully get some 10 boost.
Nani may be trying to back cap, so Caffeinated Knights backs up a little bit instead of pushing forward and capping themselves. Nani being caught out of position, uses his swap or his split clones, and then still caught though. Let's look at the talents real quick. Yeah, natural perspective being picked up on the side of Lunara, revealing all of the clones is really rough against a Samuro, because he really relies on some of that anonymity from dropping into his 3 clones and you not really knowing which one is which, at least for a few seconds. So that pickup's really going to hurt him, especially if she goes into, you know, splitting her attacks, which she does. She went Splinter Spear at 7 and is going to be able to attack all of his clones at once. Really makes me think that perhaps Tricky Gooses showed their hand a bit too early by showing the Samuro and letting them really just pick one character that's going to counter him the whole game.
Well, we also have the Sonya as well, which I think is the best off-laner counter to Sam in the game, Malthael being a close second. Just because she gets the spin to win on all the clones and really heals herself up while also doing good AoE damage to the clones and Samuro himself.
Yeah, you're right. So in a way, like, Samuro has an excellent 3-lane counter. They invade really hard on the Sonya. They actually pick up the kill. Going back to that, Sonya being a great solo lane counter to the Samuro, and Lunara being a great teamfight counter. So you'll find Samuro having to play really safe and probably not getting as much value as you would hope to get from your Samuro during most of these games. Tricky Goose is pushing in top really aggressively. They're going to have to back up as the objective pushes, but they're getting a ton of value taken away from them mid as Caffeinated Knights pushes in really far. Also pushing in on that bottom lane, Falstad trying to clear against Lunara, but just not able to clear fast enough to get this all done.
Yeah, I don't know if I love that macro trade there. They pick up the kill Sonya top, and I think they actually could have 3-man rotated and really threatened Caffeinated Knights pushing mid, and maybe could have saved that fort. Whereas top, they only get the wall and the towers and a bit of the fort damage, but they lose all of mid, and it looks like they might lose all of bottom as well on the first objective.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The fact that they're just not set up to teamfight the same way means that anytime they get a kill, they need to be looking really aggressively to see what's the maximum amount I can take from this this map at a given time.
Just focusing top here a little bit, seeing that, yeah, really it's kind of a stalemate between Samuro and Sonya at any given moment when they're fighting each other.
Yeah, ABBA, Samuro, Sonya. Well, which makes it a little bit of a win for the side of Caffeinated Knights if they're able to devote an extra resource or use one resource to take up 2 of the side of Gooses. Once again, another camp pickup. Really cleanly for Caffeinated Knights. Tricky Gooses was also able to pick theirs up, but in this situation, it's kind of the opposite of what we were seeing early, where it's best to kind of pick yours up second so that you can predictably clear the other one and let yours push while you get value somewhere else. Now, Caffeinated Knights is able to let mid push aggressively, which is going to take up a character on the side of Tricky Gooses, while they're able to defend something that Tricky Gooses is doing or take something aggressively in another lane.
Meanwhile, top, we have a cheeky pick on the side of Gooses. They're able to get Sonya mainly with a full combustion coming out onto her, which is really the difference maker, and slowed her down and allowed Sam to get a lot of value auto-attacking. So we are seeing some picks onto Sonya, partly to do with the Blaze stun and some of the CC he offers. Duck doing a good job of kind of shutting Sonya down. But we still see a major structure advantage despite these picks. And only a slight XP advantage for Gooses going into the second objective.
This will be the first objective with ultimates up, so we'll see Water Elemental come out again for the side for Jaina, Leaping Strike on the Lunara, Avalanche on the Mei, Flailing Swipe on the Stukov, Wrath of Berserker on the Sonya, like Liddell mentioned, Combustion on the Blaze, Ultimate Evolution on the Abathur, Illusion Master on the Samuro, and then Sound Barrier on the Lucio, Gust on Falstad.
So anything surprising, you think, from either team in terms of the ultimate choices?
I think Ring would have gotten more value than Elemental here, personally. The rest seems to make sense. Illusion Master is unusual just because we don't see that quite as often. I think you'll probably have more to say on that front. Nanani getting bursted down, that reveals something he just can't escape from, and he ends up going down as Caffeinated Knights picks up a kill over Tricky Gooses.
Yeah, I think the Illusion Master makes sense. They kind of needed more value from him in team fights, and that's what it provides. And theoretically, you have Falstad and Abathur as the kind of passive macro. So they're definitely going full team fight, Sam. I just think they may only win this game through avoiding team fights, which the Blade Master may have given some more dangerous split soak potential. But this is Gooses. I rarely see them go Blade Master. No, Illusion. What's it called? Is it not Blade Master? What's the
Blade Master and Illusion Master are the two, yeah.
Right. So spinny. I rarely see them go spinny. And then I see them go clones more often, or Illusion Master, which allows you to control your clones and switch between them more often.
Yeah. Similarly on the Falstad, well, we see an engagement go out on the Nani. He's going to be once again get revealed. He's going to try to clear it by swapping his clones. He's going to get out with an Abathur hat. The combustion's going to go out on the Blaze, but really no damage done as May just sets in her Unstoppable and heals a little bit, and they're pushing in this keep. Falstad also similarly went an auto attack talents at 4 and 13, which is not surprising. That's very common for you to see a Falstad go. Excellent break it down by Birdie as he places a shield and basically saves himself, and they only lose a wall here. Going back to the Falstad, I would have liked to see, since it's a team fight comp where you want to burn the tank, and I don't see that ever being the case here. I don't see them ever getting a sustained fight where he's going to get value off his sustained auto attacks, especially against a Mei who, if she ever recognizes that the auto attacks are doing damage, is just going to blind it in the future fights. I would prefer to see extra range on the E with a permanent shield, maybe a 4 for the sustain, and then going the cooldown reduction at 13 to give him more lane fight presence and more boss clear, because I think that macro advantage is really the only thing that Tricky has going for them at this point.
We see all the forts taken against Tricky Gooses here as Caffeinated Knights backs off. They have a really nice macro advantage, and really, they don't need to fight in a team fight except for over objective for the rest of the game. So we'll see how they handle this lead, whether they want to push more aggressively and kind of build on their lead, or if they want to just kind of passively play and wait between objectives to kind of get value.
Tricky deciding to wait for boss and then start boss, that definitely seems like a missed opportunity. They waited as if they were baiting boss, and then they started boss and then are engaged upon. Blaze just stuck on the silence by Stukov, unable to escape. And then that was the clone, so they actually are walk away and the silence was diverted. However, down clone now, Caffeinated Knights is able to take this boss for basically free and push it against a keep, because it's a high value lane, as all are at this point. Once again, if you'll notice mid, Caffeinated Knights was able to take the camp second and allow to ensure that they would actually win that middle lane and get more value, especially with their superior minions pushing in that lane now that a couple of forts down on the side of the Tricky Gooses.
Caffeinated Knights going for a boss objective play, not electing to push with the bottom boss, instead getting top boss, and kind of forcing the Gooses to clear bosses for the next minute and a half, I would say, maybe a bit less, and really kind of put them in a tough spot if they want to do a team fight to kind of save objective last minute, and risk losing top keep, or if they want to clear both bosses and then take a real last minute attempt at defending the objective.
You see an excellent macro play by Caffeinated Knights as they take the boss, have already sent Lunara to start that camp on their side. Didn't take Nature's Culling at 4, but took the heal talent instead, which is going to give a little bit better sustain on the camp, but it's going to take a little bit longer to capture. Not ultimately an issue. I have to imagine that if Caffeinated Knights was a little bit more worried about losing the first couple of objectives, you would have seen Lunara go that Nature's Culling instead of the Siphoning Toxin. But because they weren't worried about it, she was able to pick up the Siphoning Toxin and give sustained healing against a potential Samuro dive, which is really her only probably worry here in terms of getting ganked.
Yeah, I believe, and she can get it off of the clones as well, which is kind of allowing you to keep sustaining even when Sam's not currently on you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anyone that she's able to put that on. Nani getting bursted down, once again, visible on all sides, unable to escape that Lunara as she envisions all of his clones. Carpe on the clone once again gets silenced and then pretty much immediately burned. Not a ton of value here. Samura's already down, so the rest of the team just backs up. You know, they're going to lose this objective. Duck's like, I'm going to try to clear this a little bit, but I'm worried about being dived. They just leave Sonya to continue to make sure the objective is counting, ticking down that timer, and instead the 4 of the Caffeinated Knights decide they're going to go ahead and take a keep. They know they have to finalize it because of the healing on Abathur, so they go ahead and knock it down the rest of the way, and they retreat back. Sonya not able to keep it from fully locking. They cap it again at that last second, and that's another objective on the side of Caffeinated Knights.
They pick up Wise there as he tries to 1v1 Lasagna and save the last objective top. Admiral attempt, I think they realize that if they lost, once they're losing that objective, that it's probably game. Maybe even if it's not right now, they're going to have a 6-0 structure lead, which is really impressive on this map because it allows free reign to do either of your bosses with your lanes pushed up.
Yeah, I think this once you're able to get a structure lead on this map, you're really allowed to sit back and not do anything as your objective, just as your advantage just wins you the game. Not only having to back out almost immediately as he gets rooted, silenced, and then killed by the Lunara. The fact that she was jumping and that gives her unstoppable actually kept her from being interrupted by the gust and finalized that kill. Now with only 1 armor left, this is going to be game number 2 for Caffeinated Knights against Tricky Gooses.
Wow, pretty convincing wins, both of them, by Caffeinated Knights. I wouldn't say there was a moment in either game where I felt like the Gooses had a shot at winning or taking a lead. So real convincing, but that's not unique to Caffeinated Knights. They've looked pretty convincing in all 4 of their matches so far this season.
Yeah, I agree. In lieu of an interview, let's talk about a couple of the things we saw in each game and how we think it could have gone differently to change outcomes here, if you'd like. Or I'll ask you some questions and you can ask me some. Sure. In game 1, we talked about the early game damage deficit on the side of Tricky Gooses, and the fact that because of the pick order, which was both healers really early on, and then Caffeinated Knights electing to pick the Sonya immediately, and Tricky Gooses instead picking the Johanna. How do you think those drafts could have played out differently to either disadvantage Caffeinated Knights, or what do you think Caffeinated Knights was thinking about Tricky Gooses' draft as it progressed?
Yeah, it seems like they were worried about some kind of meme coming out on Gooses, and I guess the biggest thing I can say about Goose's draft is that I didn't know what their plan was. Like, I see the characters they picked, and it doesn't seem like they had a plan. If let's say they purposely picked all 5 of those characters without any bans existing and whatsoever, as that group of 5, I don't see a cohesive like an easy avenue to victory with those 5 characters. And so I guess my question, if we had Duck, who's the captain of Gooses, here to explain how the draft went down, is like, what went wrong in the draft, assuming that those weren't the 5 characters they initially wanted going in. I just think with Sylvanas and Zeratul, it's kind of a very low damage DPS group that really needs to capitalize on a perfect scenario of CC chains to get picks, and really needing all of your damage to go out onto one person, because you don't have the kind of AoE poke damage that comes with other big mages like Kel'Thas or Gul'dan, who can really weaken targets up to allow the Zeratul to finish off targets. And you didn't have a dive tank either when you with Joanna. So that's the main criticism I would have of the Gooses. But once again, we weren't on their comms during draft, so we don't know what their plans were and how they got interrupted throughout that process.
Yeah, I'd say on the side of Caffeinated Knights, definite props as they were first pick with Tricky Goose's choosing map pick both times. And with the first pick, before the mid-ban phase, they were able to pick Stukov, Sonya, and Cassia up, leaving the Anubarak and the Jaina. Knowing that their biggest counters were going to be heavy CC with a Sonya and a Cassia, they were able to see the Anduin and the Johanna come out, and then they were able to see the Leo and the Sylvanas. At that point, knowing that Sylvanas, as their sustain damage, was going to have a lot of spell damage, being that sustain damage, that Anubarak became a very clear, easy pickup with the natural baked-in spell armor. With a Leo, also trying to get health from your highest health targets. Sonya and Anubarak are not the highest health pool heroes in the game, so you're automatically giving Leo a little less value from his percent damage as a baseline, and you're providing that your whole team is maximizing its own win condition while minimizing the other teams. And then the fact that they knew that there wasn't going to be a whole bunch of CC coming out from Tricky Gooses allowed them to go that kind of steamrolling, constant movement, adaptive force that you saw from Caffeinated Knights in Game 1.
Right, and now we have... And really, I would say, based on how Game 1 went, I would say Gooses were in a bit of a hole early, based on draft. And I wouldn't say that they necessarily played their way out of that game. It more felt like the ways in which they lost were through the kind of built-in draft implications. So, moving on to Game 2, we have kind of an Abba Sam comp that was feared in Div B for most of last season, Season 9 of NGS. But we really see a successful counter by Caffeinated Knights to what Gooses was trying to pull off. And so I guess my question to you, fellas, like, what do you think they did so well that other teams in Div B East weren't able to do last season?
What do I think Tricky did so well, or Caffeinated Knights?
Caffeinated Knights.
Yeah. So Caffeinated Knights, I see a couple times here looking at their games this season. I see them adapting really well in draft, with very clean understandings of how do I mitigate risk from my side, and how do I exploit the advantages I see being given to me based on the enemy's draft. Twice now, I've seen them pick drafts that counter the other team and exploit those weaknesses. So, for instance, you see in the second game with the Mei being picked up and the Lunara being picked up, basically any advantage or chance that Tricky Gooses had in team fights was being mitigated right away. Mei can spec into blinds, Lunara can spec into vision, and you see the fact that with an Abathur, the macro is going to be a little bit low. Lunara has great wave clear and great macro she can spec into based on how the game is going, and Sonya is an excellent solo laner who you don't have to be worried about being picked as much, but if they are being picked, then a lot of resources are being devoted somewhere and they can shift pretty easily. So throughout the game number 2 and game number 1, I saw excellent drafting, which is a great prop to Caffeinated Knights, and then I also saw really clean macro calls. Throughout the camps, we saw an Alterac pass in game number 2. They knew when to cap it first, when they capped it second, and then when to make sure that the lanes were pushing in such a way that they were able to control the macro game somewhere else while the enemy team had to focus on what they were being forced to focus on in another part of the map. And then you see that win just slowly, and that advantage just slowly kind of waffling back and forth until it really solidified on the side of Caffeinated Knights as the game progressed, and ultimately turned out for a win for them.
Alright, I have one last question, because we've seen Gooses pull off some kind of interesting meme comps against Beef Boys, dominating that series, playing quite well, looking like they were turning their season. And it looks like Caffeinated Knights may have maybe done a good job reacting in draft, or just did a good amount of research into what Gooses could do. What do you think Gooses needs to do for the moving on in this season to kind of pivot, maybe add what can they add to their roster in terms of different strategies, different team comps to kind of keep outmaneuvering other teams?
Yeah, I think that there is a little bit. So we see a meta shift happening, which is I think strengthened some teams and weakened others. And for Tricky Uses, I see it more as being a lateral move rather than a strengthening or weakening. But with a more sustained meta that has weakened stun CC and root CC and strengthened slows and a couple other things, as well as made characters like Lunara and Gul'dan, those characters that provide constant damage and sustain team fights. I think the way that you have to maneuver to put an enemy team off their game has shifted. So if they're going to look at continuing to throw off balance, then I think that you have to take that into account and choose some things that are going to counter that as well. So, for instance, if they were going to go for this macro-heavy team, I would have loved to see some Junkrat or Chromie as long-range artillery poke that can keep the Caffeinated Knights from capping objectives. And in those situations, you can probably see that Abathur getting a lot more value, that Samuro getting a lot more value as the game gets later and later. And then the similar thing for game number one, if you're going to go for that Zero tool, then you have to be able to show that early game value really explicitly and pick characters that are just going to have those really strong early curves, even if they taper off late game. So I think the ideology around drafting is going to have to change a little bit. I also see some people going early characters like Samuro, and I think that with the meta shift, there's too much room to be able to counter those kind of memes. And so you have to save something to really shift the game or change the ideology of the enemy team late game. And if you're not doing that in drafts, then you're going to hurt yourself. So maybe keeping Samuro later. And once again, maybe that was actually the case. We're kind of making some assumptions around the pick orders based on the orders that they're showing up on these websites. So I won't say too much and lean on that and then just tell me, hey, that was actually we picked it in the correct order. But I think just some switching up around how they're thinking about these games is going to have to change for these future matchups.
Okay, well, this has been a fun little cast, replay cast. I hope some viewers enjoy it and it's helpful to some teams for their scouting. Any last comments, Fel, before I wrap things up?
No, great games. I see both teams having grown a lot from previous seasons. Caffeinated Knights with some new team members and looking like a new team in many ways, and Tricky Gooses, same team members, but switching it up and trying a lot of new things. So I think I think there's a lot of exciting things to come out of both these teams in different ways. I see Tricky Gooses adapting and growing quite a bit during the season. I see Caffeinated Knights being defined and explored a lot more as we kind of learn their dynamics. So I'm excited by how this is all going to shake out as the season continues. How about you, Liddell?
Yeah, I'm gonna give a bit of a hot take early. I see Caffeinated Knights as the team to beat in Division A East. I think they've looked really dominant, coming off a really strong season in B West in Season 9. And so I think they're the big, scary top seed right now, and I think it's going to be hard for teams to topple that. So that's my big takeaway comment from the 2 or 3 games I've seen them play. And so this has been another episode of Canadian Corner, joined by American co-host Feldjoff. Thanks for joining us. I am Liddell, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me.